The young sergeant's laughter cut through the air like a knife. "You call that a rifle? Looks like something dragged out of a museum." Every head in the small outpost turned. The old man did not answer. His hands were steady, wiping down the metal with slow, precise movements. He looked fragile, stooped shoulders, skin weathered like leather left too long in the sun, hair gone to snow. Yet his silence pressed heavier than any argument could. And then one of the Delta operators stepped closer, curious. His gaze dropped to the rifle's receiver. At first, he saw only scratches, the kind that came with decades of use. But then the letters came into focus, engraved deep, deliberate, as though carved with purpose in fire and steel. The operator froze. His jaw tightened. His chest seemed to forget how to rise. For a moment, the whole barracks felt like it had stopped breathing. Because the words on that rifle were not just markings. They were a signature, a battlefield inscription known only to a handful of men alive. And those men understood exactly what it meant. The old veteran, name long forgotten by most who passed him on the streets, had lived years in the quiet shadow of wars that had nearly erased him. His clothes were plain, his boots worn to the sole. His hands trembled when holding a coffee cup, yet never shook when touching steel. He carried himself without complaint, without demand for recognition. Most dismissed him as another relic. A man who spoke little, who lived alone, who walked with a limp that worsened when the rain came. Few knew the weight his bones carried. Even fewer dared ask, but his rifle told the story for him. Decades earlier, he had not been a frail old man. He had been fire in motion. He had been the shadow that enemies whispered about but rarely saw. Special operations before the phrase carried headlines. Long nights in jungles soaked with monsoon rain. Days where the heat scalded lungs and the only water tasted of iron and blood. He had seen comrades fall beside him, young men with laughter still on their lips, silenced mid-breath. He had carried them when his body begged him to collapse. He had buried names in foreign soil and promised silently to never forget. And so he hadn't. Every notch in the wood, every scratch on the receiver, was part of his private memorial. The rifle was not a weapon. It was a ledger of sacrifice, a promise sealed in steel. That day, in the dusty outpost where men in modern gear shouldered brand new rifles with rails and optics, he sat alone at a wooden bench. He dismantled the old weapon with reverence, as though it were a sacred ritual. The room filled with chatter from younger soldiers, all too quick to measure strength by appearances. "Bet it jams every shot," one muttered. "Guy probably doesn't even know how to clear it," another smirked. Their voices carried the careless cruelty of those who had never truly understood silence. But silence was his reply. Silence and steady hands. The Delta operator who had stepped forward, the one who noticed the engraving, felt his pulse thunder in his ears. Because he had seen that marking once before. Not in books, not in training, but in whispers shared across firelight among veterans of a different age. It was an emblem burned into legend, a unit designation long erased from public record, one that had carried out missions so deep in shadow they were denied even by the men who ordered them. Missions where survival was unlikely, where every step was wagered against the promise of never returning home. And there, carved into the old rifle, was the unmistakable engraving, "For the men who never came back." The operator's throat tightened. His own father had spoken of men like this, ghosts who fought wars nobody acknowledged. He remembered the stories told in half-broken sentences, when alcohol loosened guarded lips. Stories of an old sergeant who carried his brothers on his shoulders through a jungle ambush. A man who walked 30 miles with shrapnel in his side just to deliver his team to safety. And now, that man was in front of him, cleaning his rifle while boys snickered. The operator took a step back, shame blooming hot in his chest. The barracks grew uneasy as word spread. The engraved words passed from mouth to mouth until every man knew. Slowly, the laughter died. Silence swept the room like a tide rolling in. The old veteran never looked up. He simply continued his ritual: cloth, oil, steel. His eyes were fixed on something far beyond the room, as if he were still among the trees of another land, still carrying the weight of men who no longer breathed. For him, there was no audience, no need for explanation. But tension thickened. A young private, unaware of the gravity, scoffed. "Don't care what it says. He's just another washed-up grunt clinging to the past." The words struck the air like a slap. Before the veteran could answer, not that he would have the Delta operator turned sharply. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of thunder. "Watch your mouth. That man's the reason you get to stand here breathing." The room went utterly still. And yet, the old man said nothing. He only assembled the rifle piece by piece, each click echoing louder than any argument. His silence was a rebuke greater than anger. It was then that one of the youngest soldiers noticed something else. Carved faintly into the wooden stock, so worn it almost disappeared, was a list of initials, dozens of them. Each letter etched carefully, lovingly. "Sir, are those?" the boy whispered. The operator nodded. "His brothers." For the first time, the old veteran lifted his head. His eyes, clouded by age, still carried fire. His lips moved just enough to release words that landed like a hammer blow. "Every scratch, every mark, is a promise. And promises don't die." The room, once filled with casual arrogance, now held only reverence. The commanding officer entered, puzzled by the unnatural hush. He stopped short when he saw the rifle in the old man's lap. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed swiftly by a salute. Not the casual kind thrown out of duty, but the full, sharp gesture reserved for those whose names deserved to be spoken with honor. The younger soldier stared, bewildered. The commander's hand did not lower, and then, one by one, the Delta operators rose to their feet. Without a word, they followed suit. Salutes snapped into the air, sharp and unwavering. The old veteran did not ask for it. He did not seek it. Yet respect poured toward him like a river breaking its dam. The private who had mocked him earlier could not meet his gaze. His face flushed crimson, shame flooding through him, and in that shame grew something deeper: understanding. For the first time, he realized that strength was not measured in weight lifted or rounds fired. It was measured in the scars a man carried for others, in the silence he bore instead of demanding recognition. The veteran rose slowly, leaning on the bench for balance. His voice was quiet, but every man in the room heard it, as though it were carved into stone. Honor is not in medals, not in parades. It's in remembering the names and never letting them fade. The room was silent, long after his words faded. No one dared move. The weight of his truth lingered, heavy and sacred. That evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, the barracks stood outside in formation. No orders had been given, no announcement made. Yet instinct drew them there. The veteran stepped into the open air, rifle resting in his hands. For the first time, he allowed himself a faint smile, tired, sorrowful, yet touched with pride. And then it happened. One by one, soldiers removed their helmets. Heads bowed. Silence fell over the outpost, deeper than prayer. The wind carried nothing but respect. In that moment, justice required no punishment, no retribution. It required only truth. And the truth was undeniable. This frail, quiet man had carried more weight, more sacrifice, more brotherhood than any of them could yet imagine. The Delta operator, eyes wet though, he refused to wipe them, whispered words that would live far beyond the outpost. Some heroes never need to speak. Their silence tells the story. The old man returned to his seat, rifle across his knees. His ritual continued as the sky darkened, and though his body would one day fail him, though his name might never reach textbooks or speeches, the engraving on that rifle would carry on, for the men who never came back, and for those who now witnessed, it would never again be forgotten. Soldiers wrote home, speaking not of battles or weapons, but of an old man whose quiet dignity taught them what service truly meant. Some would never forget the lesson, that honor is not noise, that sacrifice is not forgotten, that the truest strength often walks unnoticed among us. And somewhere in the silence, perhaps, the fallen heard their names whispered once more. And so, the old veteran returned to his quiet life, never asking for recognition, never boasting of what he carried. But those who saw the engraving on his rifle knew better. They had looked into the silence of sacrifice, and it had changed them. Respect is not owed, it is earned. Yet when it stands before us, worn into the hands of those who gave everything, our only duty is to bow our heads and remember.